Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, January 12th. We begin tonight in Iran, where a violent crackdown on protests across the country has left over 540 people dead, according to activists, with the number still expected to rise. The group says many more are feared killed as demonstrations continue into a second week. As tensions grow, Tehran is also issuing a warning, saying U.S. forces and Israel would be considered legitimate targets if Washington were to use military force to protect protesters. Activists report that more than 10,000 people have been detained since the protests began. U.S. President Donald Trump spoke to reporters on Air Force One last night, saying that Iran has called to negotiate.
Well, no, they're starting to, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
Which options have you been briefed on? Are you meeting with senior?
But why would I tell you that? I'm going to tell you the.
Are you meeting with?
Am I going to really? Are you asking me to say what will they do? Where will we attack? When? And at what angle will we attack from? I mean, some of the protesters were killed through the stampeding. I mean, there's so many of them, and some were shot. We're getting a full report. I'm getting an hourly report, and we're going to make a determination.
Just quickly, Iran said that they would consider military and commercial bases as legitimate targets if used strong. Are you concerned?
Well,
about...
if they do that, we'll consider things targets they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. And they won't even believe it.
Do you think
I have options that are so strong. So, I mean, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
Do you think Iran takes their threats seriously?
I think so. Don't you think so, CNN? Don't you think so? Wouldn't you say that they probably do at this point? After going through it for years with me,
They called you? Is it still
yesterday,
an option? Is it still an option?
Iran called to negotiate. Yesterday, the leaders of Iran called. They want to negotiate. I think they're tired of being beat up by the United States.
Are you sharing details on that call?
Iran wants to negotiate, yes.
To help us break down what is happening in Iran, I was joined earlier by our contributor David Clement, along with Andrew Donaldson, an editor at ordinarytimes.com.
Andrew, David, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Andrew, we've spoken about this before, but what would the legality be of Trump striking Iran if it came to that?
Well, he could order strikes. The clarification here is, what good would this do? Would it be regime targets? Would it be military targets? This is a civilian uprising that came out of the bazaars and the marketplaces revolting as their dollar once again fell against U.S. dollar, inflationary prices, and water issues like water power, problems with the economy, things like this. So military action, what is it going to do? Is it expressly to bring down the regime or what? Because civilian unrest like this, a legitimate military target may be a little hard and a little hard to tell what it would do. So he has the authority to do it on a quick strike like we've seen in recent history. The question is, what good would it do? How would it be targeted? And what would its effectiveness be?
And David, what exactly could be targeted in a scenario if the U.S. does strike Iran?
Yeah, Andrew brings up a good point. It's a tough question to answer. It would have to be something seen as legitimate, but both legitimate in terms of not injuring civilians, but also legitimate in terms of how it's perceived on the ground by protesters. So whether that's IRGC targets or infrastructure that the regime is using to quell these protests, we don't know. Would it be a different type of action to restore internet rather than like a military strike based on the U.S. military's capabilities? Something like that is probably possible. But it would have to be precise because the legitimacy angle of it really depends on how it's viewed by people on the ground and if it's actually aiding their efforts to overthrow the government.
Now, Andrew, Iran has said that it is prepared to go to war if need be. What would Iran's response be?
Well, ironically enough, they said this after the strikes that the U.S. did before. And of course, Israel has struck them multiple times. They always say this, and they don't really do a lot because remember, usually they use their terrorism forces and networks to project power abroad. Well, we know that their intelligence and terrorism apparatuses have been severely reduced because of the issues in Israel and the things that have gone in the wake of the October 7th attack a few years ago. We know those capabilities are greatly diminished. So is that a part of this puzzle piece where some of their proxies have fallen, some of their resources on their intelligence front have clearly been diminished? Now, normally us and the Israelis have really good intelligence inside. I wonder what kind of intelligence our leadership's getting fed and what they're telling them about how stable the regime is right now because of those issues. One of the big levers they usually go to is their terrorism forces. That David mentioned the Republican Guard, that kind of stuff. Is it as strong as it used to be? And does that mean this regime might actually topple this time as opposed to past incidences?
And David, we know that protests like this have happened before. How does this compare to previous protests in terms of American response?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly different than under the Obama administration. Something similar under Obama, and essentially he was advised not to really weigh in or express any kind of true solidarity with the protesters at the time, out of concern that American assistance would create a scenario where it would rally citizens of Iran around the flag and actually increase support for the regime. In retrospect, I think that's one of the instances that Obama regrets. There's been a lot of reporting on that in memoirs and whatnot. This is different. And I think that so long as whatever the action is, if it happens, is precise in aiding the protesters, you would not see that anti-Americanism increase as a result of whatever that next step is.
Well, Andrew, David, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Los Angeles police responded Sunday after a U-Haul box truck drove through a street packed with demonstrators during an anti-Iran protest, sending marchers scrambling for safety and sparking chaotic scenes as people chased after the vehicle. The demonstration was being held in support of the Iranian people when the truck suddenly sped down the crowded roadway, forcing protesters to jump out of the way to avoid being struck. No serious injuries were immediately reported. Witnesses say several demonstrators ran after the truck as it fled the scene, attempting to stop the driver. The vehicle was eventually halted several blocks away, where it was quickly surrounded by multiple police cars. Police are now considering assault charges for the driver. And U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to sideline Exxon from Venezuela's oil market, criticizing the company's response to his call for American oil firms to quickly return to the South American country. Trump's comments came after Exxon's CEO Darren Woods told the president at the White House meeting last week that Venezuela was uninvestable in its current state.
With respect to Venezuela in particular, we have a very long history in Venezuela. In fact, we first got into Venezuela back in 1940s. We've had our assets seized there twice. And so you can imagine to re-enter a third time would require some pretty significant changes from what we've historically seen here and what is currently the state. If we look at the legal and commercial constructs and frameworks in place today in Venezuela, today it's uninvestable. And so significant changes have to be made.
Trump addressed this with reporters yesterday, saying that he was unhappy with Exxon's reaction.
How many oil companies make commitments to the United States after your meeting on Friday?
A lot of them, yeah.
Which has to have an Exxon?
Well, I don't want to say. No, I didn't like Exxon's response. We have so many that want it. I'd probably be inclined to keep Exxon out. I didn't like their response. They're playing too cute.
Exxon did not immediately comment, and the company's shares dipped modestly in pre-market trading following Trump's remarks. And residents in Minneapolis and communities across the United States continue to stage vigils, rallies, and protests against the Trump administration's immigration crackdown after last Wednesday's fatal Immigration and Customs Enforcement shooting that claimed the life of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. Demonstrators chanted slogans such as, quote, abolish ICE and no justice, no peace. And many called for ICE agents to leave the city entirely. U.S. President Donald Trump addressed what happened in Minneapolis, saying, quote, we have to respect our law enforcement.
Everyone's seen it, and the woman was very violent. She's a very radical person. Very sad what happened. Her friend was very radical. Go and
but
drive.
For the officer, absolute immunity. How would you define that?
Well, I'm going to let the people define it. But immunity, you know what immunity means as well as I do.
So that officer should be back on the force?
People can't be treating law enforcement that way, whether it's ICE or Border Patrol or our police and men and women. You can't do that. We have, the law enforcement in our country is doing really well, despite the fact that Sleepy Joe Biden allowed people to pour through an open border. Crime stats just came out. We have the best crime stats on record, despite all the criminals he allowed into our country. We've gotten a lot of them out. We have to respect our law enforcement.
Coming up after the break, as Prime Minister Mark Carney travels to China, former detained Canadian Michael Kovrig says the Prime Minister will need to preserve Canada's values and interests. We'll be right back after the break. As Prime Minister Mark Carney travels to China, former detained Canadian Michael Kovrig says the Prime Minister will need to preserve Canada's values and interests while seeking economic growth. Kovrig, an expert with the International Crisis Group, was held prisoner in China in 2018 for more than 1,000 days. It was in retaliation for the arrest of a Chinese tech executive in Vancouver.
The government needs to be perhaps judicious about when it speaks out and how it speaks out, but it should not allow China to condition it into silence over egregious issues, because that becomes a slippery slope, right? We gave you this one economic benefit, and then China notices, and as a result, they were quiet about those other things. That can keep building until eventually your foreign policy is constrained, and the behavior of leaders and government officials in Ottawa is to always look to Beijing first and see, well, if we do this or say this, what will China do? And as right there, you've been behaviorally conditioned, right? And so that's a very delicate diplomatic dance to manage. It's ultimately about keeping hold of your values and your integrity, and having a strategic approach that prioritizes your holistic national interests, rather than just looking at relations deal by deal and agreement by agreement.
According to an Angus Reid survey, around 26% of Canadians reported changing, postponing, or canceling their U.S. travel plans last year. While tens of thousands have abandoned American Sunbelt destinations due to the Trump tariffs, there are still many who are making their way south. Miles Zimbalek is originally from Saskatchewan. He loves snowbirding in Arizona so much that he made it his full-time home. He shares his details with an interview with our Western Canada Bureau Chief, Hal Roberts.
While so many are boycotting the United States and have pulled up stakes that are now snowbirding in places like southern Italy, Portugal, and even Mexico. So why did you decide to stay in Arizona?
You know what? Arizona's fantastic. I've made it my home for the last 11 years now. And when I came down 11 years ago, I just kind of fell in love with it. Obviously, the climate is kind of the number one draw for all Canadians. And that's why we all head south for the winters. I didn't expect to make it my home, but when I came down for a golf trip 11 years ago, just fell in love with Arizona, and nothing's changed. It's still a great place to live. The weather's fantastic almost year round, other than the summers get a little warm, but I love it here. I don't see any reason to leave, that's for sure.
Tens of thousands of Canadians are protesting the Donald Trump tariffs and don't appreciate the Canada 51st state rhetoric. That doesn't really bother you?
You know what? I don't like it, but I'm not going to change my lifestyle and where I live because of it. At this time, I don't see long lasting effects from it. You know how Donald Trump works. He makes a lot of noise and how he negotiates, and that can turn people off. And I think most Canadians kind of think the same way, where we don't like what he's saying, but we're not going to change our ways. Most snowbirds are still coming south. Especially if you own the property, you're still going to head back to your property. You're not going to change your lifestyle because of that. But there are a few that are turned off and have decided to change their ways.
Now, how about the cost of living in the United States? I mean, the Canadian dollar doesn't quite go as far, but I guess because you've been down there so long now, everything's in U.S. dollars.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't affect me too much because I live and I work here and I earn U.S. dollars, so I'm not affected. But yeah, the average snowbird, we're seeing lots of changes on that. When I first came down 11 years ago, the cost of living was significantly cheaper. The U.S. was just coming out of the mortgage meltdown, so things were a lot cheaper. The real estate was extremely cheap, and the currency it was a big difference. The Canadian dollar was $1.10 at one point about 15 years ago. So when Canadians came down, then they were buying properties at pennies on the dollar. Now it's expensive. Now it's kind of a flipped scenario where the real estate's tripled or quadrupled in some cases, and the Canadian dollar is much weaker. So to take those U.S. dollars back to Canada makes a big difference.
You know, it appears as though some good deals may be had in places like Arizona and Florida with the amount of Canadians who are now selling their condos and townhomes. In fact, a number of markets in Florida are flooded with properties for sale right now.
Florida's seeing a little bit more. There's definitely more people pulling out of Florida, I think, than they are out of Arizona. The Arizona real estate market on the whole is pretty balanced and staying fairly strong. There's a lot of job growth in the greater Phoenix area. We're not seeing snowbirds pull out of this area as much, I think, as we did in Florida. Florida's had a lot of concerns over the last few years, not only the political rhetoric, but hurricanes, cost of insurance, or even the ability to insure your property at all. So there's more concerns in Florida, no question, for homeowners there than there are in Arizona. And I think we're seeing more people exit from Florida than Arizona right now.
And if people don't want the humidity, that's why they choose places like Arizona, where it's a lot more dry, right?
Yeah, and Canadians kind of choose, Eastern Canada typically will choose to go to Florida just because travel's easier. It's an easy direct flight, and same with the Western Canadians. They typically come down to Arizona or Palm Springs is another hot spot. So, but we see some crossover, and we're seeing more and more people coming from Ontario to Arizona in the last few years.
You know, a number of seniors I've spoken with, Miles, don't understand how someone can actually have two residences, one in Canada and one in the United States. It's just not affordable.
Absolutely, and that's changed. Like I said, 15 years ago when the Canadian dollar was stronger and properties were a lot cheaper, there's a lot more people that were able to do it. Now it's completely changed, where to have a second home is extremely expensive, especially when you're paying $1.40 for every dollar US. It gets really expensive to maintain that property, and to pay all your expenses on it. So many are choosing to sell their properties mostly because of financial reasons. We've had a couple people decide because of political reason, but that's pretty rare. The majority of people that we see selling their properties is financial, or that they've just gotten older and it's tougher to travel for them.
Now, speaking of expensive, Miles, how about health insurance? I mean, a lot of people talk to me about how expensive it is in the United States if you get sick. We've heard of these horror stories, people checking into hospital, checking out with these bills of $50,000, $60,000 because they don't have the right coverage. How has it been for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the Canadians that are traveling down, travel health insurance is essential. You can't take the risk of traveling to the United States without travel health insurance. You've got to protect yourself. At Canada USA, we offer insurance to all our clients as well when they're traveling to the US. For myself, it's a little different. I've exited from Canada as a permanent resident, so now I'm on the US system, and that's been a learning curve for me. Getting into the learning to buy your own private health insurance and how the system works. It's much more complicated and hard to navigate. And much more expensive too. But we pay maybe a little bit less in income taxes, but we pay a lot more in healthcare insurance and things like that. So at the end of the day, I feel like it balances out fairly close, but it's definitely a different system.
And you offer some cross-border services for Canadians through the company you just mentioned earlier, Canada to USA. Can you explain?
That's right. Yeah, we kind of started about 10 years ago, and just to help Canadians when they're traveling down to the U.S., whether it's with currency exchange, we have fantastic deals for Canadians with travel health insurance, and then our primary service is with real estate. We help Canadians buying and selling real estate and navigating all the cross-border tax hurdles and legal needs that they do when they buy and sell a property. So we're kind of that one-stop shop resource for Canadians when they're buying and selling property, or even just traveling down to spend a few weeks.
Miles Zimbaluk, now part of the Arizona population. I guess you're a resident there and part of Canada to USA.com. Enjoy all of the warmth and sunshine in Arizona.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says the Department of Justice has served the central bank with subpoenas and threatened it with a criminal indictment over his testimony related to renovations at the Fed's headquarters. The move marks a sharp escalation in President Donald Trump's ongoing battle with the Federal Reserve, an independent agency the president has repeatedly criticized for not cutting interest rates as aggressively as he wants. In a video statement, Powell said the threat of criminal charges is a pretext and part of a broader effort to undermine the Fed's independence.
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project.
A U.S. judge says she plans on blocking the Trump administration's attempt to end family reunification parole. That would preserve temporary legal protections for more than 10,000 relatives of American citizens and permanent residents.
So somewhere over like 10,000 individuals who are here under this program with parole, working here legally. So we're here today to ask the judge to consider our emergency motion to grant a temporary restraining order to block that policy from going into effect, which will go into effect in 5 days if it isn't stopped. Right. So the judge was definitely very eager to listen to both sides today, and very concerned about what's happening or what will happen soon to individuals, parolees who are here in 5 days regarding the termination. And she expressed that she does plan to issue a temporary restraining order soon. We don't know when. To block this policy from going into effect, while she considers the issues with a little bit more time to potentially issue a further ruling to also block this policy, but block it for the duration of the lawsuit.
Coming up, Canada's artificial intelligence minister says the federal government is not considering a ban on X. We'll be right back. Canada's artificial intelligence minister, Evan Solomon, says the federal government is not considering a ban on X, despite growing controversy over AI-generated deepfakes on the platform. X, which is owned by Elon Musk, has faced international criticism over sexualized deepfakes created by its AI chatbot. The issue has prompted action in the United Kingdom, where regulators are investigating the platform and a potential ban is being discussed. Solomon said in a post early Sunday that reports suggesting Canada was considering a ban are inaccurate. His office confirmed discussions about the controversy are ongoing, and more information on possible next steps are expected soon. And Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne is in Washington, D.C. Sunday and today for meetings focused on trade and critical minerals. In a news release, the federal government says Champagne is meeting with G7 counterparts and other like-minded countries. He is also set to take part in a finance ministers meeting on critical minerals supply chains, hosted by the U.S. Treasury Secretary. Champagne has said Canada needs to accelerate the extraction and refining of critical minerals, arguing the country is well positioned to help Europe reduce its reliance on China for key resources. At the G7 leaders meeting in Alberta in June, member countries launched an action plan and a production alliance aimed at strengthening critical mineral supply chains. Canada announced the first projects under the alliance in October. And gold has once again proven its ability to dominate headlines, with 2025 delivering dramatic price swings, historic rallies, and renewed attention on the precious metals market. Investors have watched safe haven demand collide with shifting monetary policy, geopolitical uncertainty, and explosive moves in related assets, most notably silver, which stunned markets with a once-in-a-generation surge. As the year closed with an unexpected pullback in gold prices, questions remain about what truly drove the moves and what lies ahead. To break down the forces behind gold's rise, silver's extraordinary performance, and the outlook for the months to come, we're joined by Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, thank you so much for the time.
Teresa, always good to be here.
Now, I want to start with what is the single most important factor behind the rally in gold in 2025?
Well, I think you were alluding to it in your introduction. Very well said. Considerations around safe havens, I think was how you phrased it. Words to that effect. That the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. dollar, and in the form of Treasury bonds, Treasury notes, had been seen as the safe haven for foreign reserves for countries all over the world for well, really, funnily enough, since the U.S. dollar came off the gold standard over 50 years ago. So rather than gold, which is heavy, people have been governments, to be specific, have been holding their reserves in U.S. Treasuries. Well, the price of gold was bouncing around, so trying to get through 2000, and it couldn't sustainably get there until 2024, early 2024. It broke through, never, it seems, to look back. But I think there was a lot of factors in there. But in this past year, it's been largely the U.S. Treasuries are no longer seen as the safe haven they once were, or certainly not the sole safe haven. We had seen up until this year, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, so-called, take up a lot of the slack because they were independent. They were something that was priced in US dollars, but independent of US dollars, in that they weren't being issued willy-nilly to pay for the debt. They wasn't affected by US government shutdowns of federal services. They were produced at a regular and decreasing rate rather than an irregular and increasing rate, the way the greenback has been printed in the last number of years. So what started in 2024, I think, accelerated in 2025. As a result, putting a long-winded story short, people just don't like or trust the U.S. the way they used to. So they're looking for other alternatives. Bitcoin has had a good long run, and I think it's gold and silver's turn.
Well, how much of gold's strength is tied to central bank policy, especially interest rates and expectations around future cuts?
Well, I think there's certainly something to do with that. To the extent, as I was saying earlier, to the extent that monetary policy is easing. It's a little bit different than saying the government's printing money, but not totally unrelated to the government printing money. Fiscal policy, that is what the budgets of government say, and monetary policy, the amount of the money supply, are, at least in theory, separate. But oh my word, it's a cluster foul up in the United States right now. That's just a strong language I'm allowed to use on news forum, apparently, where the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve is facing allegations of wrongdoing by the Justice Department, and the President of the United States is saying, well, I'm going to let the Justice Department decide if he's a criminal, around the expansion or renovation of the Fed building, unless Mr. Powell is actually pocketing money, which I severely doubt. I've seen renovations take criminally long, but I've never known them to be actual criminal enterprises in and of themselves. And Mr. Trump, President Trump, call your office regarding the expansion of the White House ballroom, or the so-called now Trump Kennedy Center. So to the extent that investors, foreign governments, and others are losing confidence in central banks, particularly the U.S. Federal Reserve's independence of the executive branch, of the president and his office, that's problematic, because the independence of the Federal Reserve has been one of the key underpinnings for the U.S. dollar being the world's reserve currency. It's made a lot of things possible for the United States. They could print money forever, it seemed, and have almost no inflation. Is it a coincidence that as governments lose confidence in the US dollar, that inflation, as measured by the consumer price index, has begun to take off? Because there isn't the buying that there once was. So as long as foreign governments are willing to take excess dollars off your hands, you don't get inflation. When they stop, you do, and that's what we're seeing.
Well, gold's little brother, silver, rallied over 200%, 250% to be exact, in 2025. What's the story there?
Well, I think it's similar. Silver is its own creature as well. As the great philosopher said, you can't find gold in a silver mine, you can't find whiskey in a bottle of wine. I have no idea how that applies to this conversation, but the silver has at least industrial uses. Gold is there to sit there and look at. There's uses for jewelry. How weddings are brokered in much of Southeast Asia and some of the rest of the world. But silver has actual uses in communications and others. So it has a dual function, both as a store of value and as industrial uses. So communications being one of those. So I think silver's rise, which is more or less approximates that of gold, is, well, it's a lot cheaper. I mean, you have to have a lot more silver to have the same value as gold, but to buy a bar of silver is a tiny fraction, a hundredth approximately, or 50th of a bar of gold. So it's another store of value, a cheaper store of value, and Grisham's law has said that inferior currency tends to push out superior currency, which this may be a manifestation of. As gold gets to a certain price, other things that are considered both solid and timeless and a store of value will take up some of the slack. So those are the two factors.
And with silver surging over 250%, as I've mentioned, are we entering a precious metals rotation where silver could stay in the spotlight?
It certainly could. I never like to talk about gold without putting a shout out to my late professional colleague, Nick Barishev, whose company BMG, he ran specifically on the idea that gold would get to $10,000 an ounce. And he wrote a whole book about it, literally called $10,000 Gold. Now, the trouble with waiting for a particular thing to work out is you may not live long enough, as Nick did not live long enough to see this huge gold rally. If you're just waiting for that one thing to take place, you may be right, but timing is kind of important when it comes to investing. So I do think both gold and silver, but I don't think silver in isolation of gold. As I think I alluded to or said earlier, silver is running at least in part because it's a cheaper way to play the precious metals business. It's $4,000 odd dollars, 4,500 US dollars to buy an ounce of gold, and again a fraction of that to buy an ounce of silver. So you can be in the game. I mean, even Berkshire Hathaway did I think a 10-for-1 split with the Berkshire Hathaway Bs just to make it a little more accessible to the average investor. So I think there's an element of that going on with silver. But yes, I think both will continue to do well. I would not be surprised if we see a significant enough run in gold, whether Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the other cryptocurrencies come back, and also stable coins of various, both based on fiat currencies, based on government issued currencies, and possibly on precious metals as well. You see, because gold is bulky, silver is bulky. You can't really travel with it around, but there may be a market at some point for a stable coin based on the precious metals, which has a fixed value that you can actually anchor to, but is much more freely tradable and liquid than the actual metal ever could be.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for that breakdown. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Teresa.
Coming up after the break, toy giant Lego has unveiled its new smart brick technology, a sensor-packed brick that adds digital sounds and reactions to traditional Lego play. We'll be right back after these messages. Toy giant Lego has unveiled its new smart brick technology, a sensor-packed brick that adds digital sounds and reactions to traditional Lego play. The company says the move is an evolution of physical play and not a departure from it. But the announcement has sparked concern among child development and play experts, who worry that adding reactive technology to toys could change how children use their imagination and control their play. We sat down with Josh Golan, executive director of the children's well-being group Fair Play, to ask if these new smart bricks prove that there's real anxiety about technology entering children's play.
I think the reason this has struck such a nerve is because we're seeing parents and professionals who work with children get more and more concerned about the outsized role that technology is playing in children's lives. So there's so much screen time that kids have. There's increasingly AI is being targeted to young children and teens. And I think, a lot of us believe that playtime should be a respite from that. It should be a time for kids to, play without being influenced by technology, to use their own imaginations and creativity. And so I think it's really because of this context that we're so concerned about the role of technology in children's lives.
We also asked about toys reacting to kids and how that changes the way children play.
So I think it changes the way kids play because they start orienting their play towards getting those sounds and those interactions rather than being focused on building a creative storyline or building something new and creative. Like, it becomes a reward for them to hear those sounds that the toys are making. And so rather than exploring all of the possibilities that the toy, a toy like a Lego brick has, they start getting very focused on how can I make it make that noise.
Lego says these toys are still physical and screen-free, but we wonder if the real issue is screens, or is play being guided by technology?
The real issue is play being guided by technology. I think, we've been not just with Lego, but with a lot of AI toys, we're seeing them being marketed as, oh, they're screen free. But I think that misunderstands what the problem with screens are for children. It's not that, that it's a screen and the physical properties of the screen. It's that the screens, the programs on the screens have their own things that they want children to do. And so it undermines children's autonomy and creativity. And so when we see this technology in these toys, sure, they're screen free, but it's really interrupting that self-guided, imaginative, creative play that is just so essential to child development in early years.
Kids already spend so much time in digital environments. We asked Josh how important it is that play remains one space where kids are in full control.
I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, kids are spending so much time where their experiences are guided and controlled by algorithms and artificial intelligence, and the way that these social media and other platforms are designed in ways that, that kids don't understand. And so to give them that quiet space away from all the noise and the bells and whistles for them to really exercise their imaginations at a time when, the time for creative play has just been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking for children. And that has real long-term and serious consequences.
Finally, we move beyond Lego and touched on what parents and toy makers should be thinking about as technology becomes part of even our most traditional toys.
I think what parents and toy makers should be thinking about is, just because we can add more technology to something doesn't mean that we should. And in fact, child development experts have long said that the best toys are 90% child and 10% toy. That means that the experience of playing with that toy is really being created by the child themselves, and that the toy is basically an empty slate where that the child can fill and shape in the direction that they want. And so as antithetical as it may seem to just sort of common sense, right? Where technology is better, right? No, actually, when it comes to toys, simpler is better. Less noise is better. Less blinking lights is better. And so I encourage parents to look for those old school, really simple toys that will actually spark creativity instead of some of these newfangled technological toys.
Former top 3 tennis player Milos Raonic announced his retirement from professional tennis, bringing an end to one of the most successful careers in Canadian men's tennis history. The 35-year-old wrote in a post on X that the time has come. I am retiring from tennis. He continued by saying, "This is a moment you know will come one day, but somehow you never feel ready for it. This is as ready as I will ever be. Tennis has been my love and obsession for most of my life." Known for his powerful serve, Raonic won 8 ATP titles after turning professional in 2011. The highlight of his career came in 2016 when he defeated Roger Federer in a dramatic 5-set semifinal at Wimbledon to become the first Canadian man to reach a Grand Slam final. And in the NHL, Alexander Ovechkin surpassed Ron Francis for the second most 20-goal seasons in NHL history and moved within one of Gordie Howe's league record, reaching the milestone for the Washington Capitals in a 3-2 loss to the Nashville Predators at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville on Sunday. Ovechkin scored against the Predators to reach 20 goals for the 21st time in as many seasons in the NHL. Francis scored 20 goals in 20 of his 23 NHL seasons.
Ovechkin will set it from the top. John Carlson closing. Ovechkin, one time, he scores! The hot streak continues for the Capital captain.
No, I talked about him in the open. His shot is so much cleaner now over the last month or so. The timing is there. The follow-through is there. The quickness is there. The mentors, fathers in tow are standing for the great 8.
Howe holds the NHL record for most 20-goal seasons and most consecutive 20-goal seasons with 22. And in the NFL, from wildcard drama to statement wins, the NFL playoffs delivered a weekend full of high stakes and big performances. Here's a recap of how wildcard weekend unfolded across the league. Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, and the San Francisco 49ers closed their wildcard weekend by knocking out the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles last night, ending Philly's title defense.
Tip incomplete. San Francisco takes over, looking to take away the upset. And it's Eric Kendricks, who's been here a month, who makes the biggest play of the night.
What a game. Wow.
In New England, the Patriots left little doubt dominating the Los Angeles Chargers in a convincing win at home.
Late pass. Oh, picked up on Henley. Twists him. Man top. Henry's got it to the end zone. Touchdown, New England, against his old team in the playoffs.
And in Buffalo, the Bills beat the Jacksonville Jaguars to secure their first round playoff win since the 1992 AFC Championship.
Hit two is at the 50. That would match his career long as 68-yard attempt. Ball's intercepted. The game is over as Cole Bishop gets it off the rebound. Tre'Davious White.
Looking ahead, the 6th-seeded 49ers will travel to face the top-seeded Seahawks next Saturday. The 6th-seeded Bills visit the number 1 Broncos also on Saturday. And on Sunday, the 2nd-seeded Bears host the 5th-seeded Rams, while the 2nd-seeded Patriots will be home against the winner of tonight's matchup between the Texans and the Steelers. And the Golden Globes had its share of surprises and sweet moments last night in Beverly Hills. Canadian Seth Rogen experienced déjà vu, winning Best TV Comedy Series and Best Actor after his show The Studio depicted the very ceremony just months before.
The other nominees, it's incredible. Steve Martin, Martin Short especially. I remember growing up watching you guys my whole life, thinking one day I'm going to beat them. I did not think that. An actor, it really is only as good as the people they get to perform with, and I'm very lucky in that I get to choose those people. So I really want to thank the other performers on the show. Chase is here, Catherine Hahn's here, Summer, Catherine O'Hara, Dave and Zoe, Ted Sarandos, Gene Smart, everyone else who was here and a part of the cast of the show. I can't thank you enough. I'll get out of here now. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
The inaugural podcast award went to Good Hang with Amy Poehler. Poehler joked about her rivals at NPR by saying they're, quote, just a bunch of celebs phoning it in. Try harder. And K-pop Demon Hunters won Best Animated Film, and its hit Golden won Best Original Song, with co-singer and co-songwriter EJ encouraging viewers to keep striving.
When I was a little girl, I worked tirelessly for 10 years to fulfill one dream, to become a K-pop idol. And I was rejected and disappointed that my voice wasn't good enough. And so I leaned on songs and music to get through it. So now I'm here as a singer and a songwriter. And it's a dream come true to be part of a song that is helping other girls, other boys, and everyone from all ages to get through their hardship and to accept themselves. So thank you, Golden Globes, for accepting my voice and our voice.
I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.